The Eco-Patch is a test garden of native plants in the Potrero Hill neighborhood of San Francisco. And so it's actually part of a larger Potrero Gateway project, which is a community initiative where the neighborhood is essentially trying to reclaim Caltrans land for public and neighborhood benefit.
Alex and I used to work together in our previous office. We would often dream actually about the opportunity for working with native plants. And we both live in an apartment where we don't have a lot of space. So we would, hatch schemes of like where we could plant native plants. We reached out to the California Native Plant Society Yerba Buena chapter to offer our services as landscape architects. And we were really hoping to exchange our services for the opportunity to experiment with planting native plants.
And that's how we got in touch with Eddie Bartley and Noreen Whedon, who put us in contact with Jean Bogiagis, who was leading the neighborhood advocacy work for the Potrero Gateway project, where the Eco-Patch is now sited.
My name is Eddie Bartley. I'm a San Francisco-based avian researcher, a natural history educator, and volunteer board president for the Yerba Buena chapter of California Native Plant Society. In the late 90s, my partner Noreen and I started participating in focal studies on bird nesting success in San Francisco. What we found was that while San Francisco is this amazing winter and migratory stopover for birds, the breeding bird population and the fledgling success is much suppressed. So these gradual losses can lead to extirpation of entire species, and we've been experiencing some of that here. Unfortunately, once an ecosystem is gone, it tends to unravel other interrelated threads. We started doing some more research on that, and we found out, like in stressed ecosystems, a typical pattern that leads to local extinctions is a decrease of specialist species who rely on specific plants and food types, and an increase of generalist species who are more adaptable.
While San Francisco is physically really small, it's only 7 miles by 7 miles, it's incredibly biodiverse. We're in this California floristic province. San Francisco is bounded on one side by the ocean and on the other by San Francisco Bay. But we have, in between, we have these hills, canyons, freshwater lakes, streams, and springs, as well as this huge diversity of plants. So the ecotypes are these distinct forms of plants occurring within a particular habitat. And in San Francisco, these unique areas have distinct soil types. There's different weather. There's also these water sources, and the native plants, the bees, the birds, and the butterflies all depend upon each other. They co-evolve together.
The Eco-Patch name is specifically meant to reference a term used in ecology where a patch is a distinct area of a landscape, or specifically a landscape unit, with the idea that there's a mosaic of patches that make up a landscape. And the name also relates to our hope that we inspire people to adopt these plants into their yards and advocate for them in their public spaces so that we can have a proliferation of patches and hopefully kind of reestablish some of these plants in wildlife. The idea is that if there's enough patches in close proximity, that especially the insects and birds can island hop and reestablish themselves.
The Eco-Patch Test Garden is a 900 square foot area divided into 8 different areas, each with a different mix of plants. The plant mixes were inspired by, they're not meant to replicate native plant communities, but it'd be inspired by previous communities that would have existed either within San Francisco or nearby. For example, we've got oak savanna, serpentine prairie, and coastal dune scrub.
This site specifically has a really rich natural history because there's serpentine bedrock underneath it.
Well, serpentine that's the California state rock. It's a metamorphic rock that has special soil chemistry or chemistry with that. It's got a kind of a strange calcium to magnesium imbalance, and it also has a lot of heavy metals that are present. And because of that, actually serpentine areas support a lot of native species, but not all species necessarily occur with this very special soil type.
We started planning and designing the project in April of 2020, and the weed management started in July of 2020. We researched plants, and we had input from the California Native Plant Society people, from Patrick Reynolds, who was the former general manager at Hedgerow Farms.
I approached the Eco-Patch project like I approach all restoration projects, whether they're urban or in a wildland setting. And the idea is trying to maximize the habitat values within a particular project and also maximize the chance of success. So that's kind of the approach that I always use. And I start off with using plants that, or recommending plants that naturally occur within the region. That's kind of the first layer to try to look at. And we want to choose species that, at least regionally occur within the area.
Plant acquisition was a large part of our role. We were really specific about wanting plants that were of local ecotype. So local ecotype is specifically plants of known genetic origin. And so we worked with 7 nurseries to source around 710 plants of 33 different plant species that were of known genetic origin. And we had the most success finding plants that were of known genetic origin from San Bruno Mountain, which has a similar serpentine ecology.
This project has ecotype study areas, which are examples of some of the local native plants. And one example is there's a section with full sun and somewhat sandy soil. The coastal dune scrub plants that grow there include beach strawberry and coastal buckwheat, thrift sea pink, the lupin and lizard tail and yarrow. And then there's another section that depicts coastal prairie, and that includes Douglas iris, phacelia, native grasses, and beach strawberry. Another section has fescue, and it contains these native grasses. And then in the springtime, you'll see miner's lettuce and yarrow. There's another section that has coastal brush scrub, and that has this keystone native plant, the coastal brush, or coyote brush. And it also includes native grasses, sticky monkey flower, and yarrow. So you'll see some of the plants are in several sections, and there's also another section that has a wildflower meadow, and that includes California poppy, clarkia, tomcat clover, paintbrush, lupin, and phlox. We also have an oak understory. There was an existing coast live oak tree that we intentionally worked adjacent to at this demonstration site. And that has pink flowering currant, salvia, purple needlegrass, and lupins. There's also a little grassland area that has our state grass, the purple needlegrass, as well as clarkia, paintbrush, and other plants. The upland scrub includes coffeeberry, ceanothus, and Douglas iris, again, purple needlegrass. And so these eco tones show how these adjacent areas have distinct plants, and it depicts this unique landscape that we're in. So I think that Alex and Nikki from the field documented these local native plants. They showed when they're in bloom and the colors for each of these sections.
Native grasslands provide a lot of habitat, very high value habitat. If they are a rich mixture of species, flowering plants, and native grasses, they tend to provide a lot of habitat. For example, for pollinating insects, bees and butterflies and moths and hummingbirds and things like that. So if you have a native grassland habitat that has a lot of flowering plants, it provides a lot of high value habitat areas. But also the native grasses themselves, they can provide host plants for moths and butterflies, for example. They can provide nesting sites for things like bumblebees that will basically use the tussocks and the channels that are formed underneath the grasses for nesting. But also native grasses, they tend to be drought tolerant, right? And so that's particularly critical nowadays. Here we are entering yet another severe drought here in California. But also native grasses, they tend to have these very deep roots, and those deep roots form these deep channels into the soil. And those channels provide opportunities for infiltration of rainwater. So it's really critical to be able to hold on to all the rainwater that occurs on the site. You don't want any of that water to run off. So you have these deep root channels that holds that water, provides an avenue to get deep in the soil profile, which then the plants can access later on in the summertime.
We're hoping to see an increase in the number and diversity of insects and birds. We've already seen a lot of native bumblebees. We've also seen the red admiral, which is a native butterfly. But we're also really aware that at this point, a lot of the insects, the specialist insects that we've planted host and food plants for, don't actually have connections at this point to the site, which is why another kind of barometer for success for this site is whether people really start adopting these plants into their own backyards and advocating for them in their public spaces, because it's going to take that to really create the corridors that are essential for getting these wildlife to reestablish.
We really like to say that a goal of the project is to inspire imitation.
Home gardeners are key in turning back the tide in favor of these unique natural heritages. They got the passion, the creativity, the know-how to incorporate plants in the built environment. What's been lacking is like that familiarity and availability of the incredible diversity of all these over 500 plant species that evolved right here in San Francisco.
For the Eco-Patch, we're using iNaturalist as a way to collect data on the project.
iNaturalist is the app and platform we use for all of our work here in the Center for Biodiversity and Community at the Cal Academy. And iNaturalist is an app and a website where anyone can take pictures, which equals making and sharing an observation. So take pictures of plants or animals or any evidence of anything living and post it to the app. Within the app, there is some machine learning that will suggest identifications for what you found.
So we're asking people to record the plants that they see, the insects, and also we're recording it when we do like maintenance. It's like a journal entry. But from a design perspective, we're particularly interested in the phenological or seasonal changes of the plants. So the seasonal change is like more than just what time of year a plant is flowering. And so we're looking at iNaturalist to learn more about the kind of nuances of those changes. Like, for example, do they have visually interesting seed pods or changes in leaf color? And we're beginning to integrate that sort of iNaturalist data and analysis into our design process, which is really exciting.
iNaturalist provides this universal platform, right, that we can all work on together. But you can imagine for a project like the Eco-Patch, right, you could use the app iNaturalist for lots of different things. But one thing that you can do is have people make observations, not just at the Eco-Patch, but around the Eco-Patch, and make observations to see what's found, especially what insects and birds and mobile wildlife, what's found around the Eco-Patch. Ideally, if the idea of planting native plants expands out from the Eco-Patch, you can continue to monitor, like, do more insects come to these places with native plants? And as a test in the Eco-Patch garden, you can look and see what insects and what pollinators and birds are coming to the different ecotype. And that's something that people can do by just slowing down and observing and taking pictures when they are in the garden.
I'd like this project to serve as an important demonstration project for other folks that are considering habitat restoration. You know, it's kind of the last frontier, these urban and suburban areas. There are significant opportunities, you know, everywhere you look for replacing traditional landscaping with native species. These native species, of course, increase the biodiversity within the landscape. They add tremendous value for both the abundance and the diversity of insects that are present. So if we can get projects like the Eco-Patch project to, sort of motivate people to do similar work, we can have a significant impact on the environment.